It was a great accomplishment. It's a great feat, and some compared with building the Panama Canal.
Planes for Russia at Fairbanks, Alaska. The first Russia-bound planes
Through a Lend-Lease program, the United States got 8,000 planes to Russia by way of the Alaskan Highway.
African-American soldiers also built airfields that paved the way for the liberation of Europe.
Hard work, sweat, and tears. And the thing was this: you don't go home until you finish this line. The quicker you get it finished, then you go home.
The Tuskegee experiment was designed to fail. I was not going to fail.
The officer in charge told me, he said, well, we don't have any colored in the military, Army Air Corps. There are other places for you, and we will not have any. The basis for their refusal was a staff report which had determined, I use that word euphemistically, that colored troops did not have the capability, the intelligence, the courage, or even the coordination to fly fighter aircraft.
There were a couple of young black men in the Chicago area who felt so strongly about wanting to fly military aircraft that they rented an old Lincoln Page biplane and flew it to Washington to focus on the fact that blacks did not have opportunities to learn to fly military aircraft. They were met by then Senator Harry Truman. His statement, if you guys have the guts enough to fly that thing all the way from Chicago to Washington, then I have guts enough to see that you get what you're asking for.
Mrs. Roosevelt went down to Tuskegee on a visit, and while she was there, she went out to Moulton Field and she met Chief Anderson, who was the chief pilot of the primary phase of flying. And she went, to the dismay of the Secret Service and everybody, she went for a ride with Chief Anderson. And when she went back to Washington, within a short time, the Tuskegee experiment was begun.
The War Department announces plans for the formation and training of an all-black pursuit squadron. An airfield to train the pilots is built in Tuskegee, Alabama.
The first class consisted of 12 students and one military officer, who was then Captain Davis, who later became the commander.
I was transferred from the base at Tuskegee Army Airfield to command the 99th in August of '42. We were very much interested in flying. I think that everybody felt that this was an opportunity because they'd not had the advantage of such training before.
We had come to the realization that that it would not come easy, that we would have to be almost twice as good as the other people if we were to succeed, but admonished ourselves and admonished our comrades that this was not only for us, but it was for our whole race of people.
In April 1943, the 99th Flight Pursuit Squadron leaves for North Africa. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. is in command. He has no combat experience. The 99th is stationed at Cape Bon, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group. Trained for pursuit, the 99th ironically flies bombing and strafing missions in North Africa and Sicily through the summer of 1943.
And they had great problems in 1943 because the commander of the 33rd Group was an avowed segregationist, and he did everything he could to keep the unit segregated. They were on a different part of the airfield. They weren't invited to join the officers' club on his part of the airfield. They were kept segregated in every way, shape, or form. Probably the worst thing that the commander did to them is that in their first combat missions, he didn't allow a veteran pilot to lead them into combat.
In September 1943, the lack of significant fighter engagements endangers the 99th's continued existence. Davis is ordered back to the States to defend the 99th's record.
General Davis then Lieutenant Colonel Davis had to fight very hard to keep the unit flying. The Air Force recommendation, the Army Air Corps recommendation, was to abandon the 99th and to stop the training of the 332nd, which was in training at Selfridge Army Airfield at that time.
Lieutenant Colonel Davis's defense keeps the Tuskegee Airmen flying. With huge losses mounting for the 15th Air Force, the 332nd Fighter Group moves to Ramatelli, Italy, in April 1944 to begin bomber escort duty.
Davis snapped at the opportunity. He had been flying a very obsolete airplane, the P-39 Airacobra. He was given initially the P-47 for about a month, and then the P-51.
Just about every day we were flying top cover for bombers, protecting the bombers from enemy fighters. Now the bombers, they have to fly straight and level at a certain speed so that the bombardier can make sure that the bombs fall where they're supposed to. We flew around all the smoke to pick them up at the other end. And it's a sad commentary when you see those guys coming in there flying like bugs, and you can see them explode.
On mission after mission, bomber crews look to the 332nd's Red Tail fighter escort for protection.
You would stay with the bombers because that was your primary job, because when the fighters went running off chasing other fighters, chasing German fighters, then new German fighters would come in and there the bombers would be all by themselves.
The 332nd never lost a bomber to an enemy fighter in 200 missions stretching from May of 44 to April of 45. That is a unique record. No white unit, and all the rest of them were white, that stayed in the hunt as long as they did, could make that claim.
One of the Army's best kept secrets was that there was a black fighter group. We had no idea that the Red Tails, who had given us the finest escort and whose escort we preferred, were black pilots. Not an idea in the world.
The Tuskegee Airmen were a bunch of very courageous, able, intelligent, aggressive young African Americans who were not going to be stopped by anything, and we were some damn good pilots.
There was just a feeling of patriotism and a feeling that everyone wanted to help out in the war effort.
African American women also answered the call to service. From Europe to North Africa to New Guinea and here at home, they serve and work to win the war. In April 1941, the Army Nurse Corps has 48 African American nurses. By 1944, there will be 220 black Army nurses. African American females in the Women's Army Corps, or WACs, also have an uphill battle to serve their country. Charity Adams commanded the 688 Central Postal Directory Battalion.
The white WACs had been serving overseas for almost 2 years by this time, but for some reason the usual black troops may make trouble, or blacks can't do what others are doing and whatnot. Overseas commanders did not want black women to come over.
I guess if there is anything that I remember about the Second World War, it was the fact that I was a member of the 6888 Central Postal Directory. It was the first and the only battalion of black women to serve overseas during the Second World War. And I'm very, very proud of that.
Stationed in Birmingham, England, and later Rouen, France, the 6888 processes mail, forwarding eagerly awaited packages and letters to Americans throughout Europe.
Their job was redirecting mail that had had one attempted delivery based on the last address the people back home had. But of course in war times you move pretty fast. Our job was not exciting, but it was necessary, because it was necessary for the morale of the troops. Mail meant morale.
By the war's end, the Navy had commissioned 6 black female officers and had enlisted 70 waves. The Coast Guard by this time had accepted a few black women in its reserve program, the SPARS. For civilian African American women, World War II brings new challenges and opportunities. 600,000 out of 1 million African Americans who enter paid employment during the war are women.
Picatinny Arsenal at Dover, New Jersey needed more workers to make more ammunition for our fighting forces. The appeal was to Harlem.
A former factory worker sums it up best when she declares,
Lincoln may have freed the slaves, but Hitler was the one that got us out of the white folks' kitchen.
This young white sailor said, "You black SOB. I'd heard they had commissioned you guys, but I never thought I'd see one."
So I was standing down on the corner of 14th and Independence Avenue, all dressed up in my blues, and I never got so many hate stares in my life from white servicemen who looked at me as well said, "Who does he think he is?"
The Navy resists taking blacks, except as stewards. The Marine Corps remains all white. In 1942, the need for manpower cracks the Navy's and Marine Corps' color line.
The Secretary of the Navy said that black folks couldn't handle the modern arms of warfare that they had in the Marine Corps, and that was a challenge to me, and that's why I went in.
In June 1942, the U.S. Marine Corps enlists blacks. From across the country, African American recruits arrive at Munford Point for boot camp. For many of them, Munford Point, like other Southern bases, is a rude awakening.
How in the world did I ever get into something like this? Our receptionist said, "You will say yes, sir, no, sir, and you will not move until you are told to do so. Do you understand, boy?"
I'd heard what happened to black people or colored people, as we were called then, south of the Mason-Dixie line, but I had no personal real experience, and my parents, who were Southerners, basically never talked about it.
Colonel Samuel A. Woods, Munford Point's commanding officer, is sympathetic to the challenges faced by his recruits.
Colonel Wood, who, as you know, was a graduate of the Citadel, was, in my opinion, the fairest white man I've ever met or seen. Almost weekly, he would have us write a letter to Washington in which he was complaining about the way we were treated as human beings in North Carolina.
We did all the things that all Marines do: close order drill, find a rifle range, hand-to-hand combat, using maps, survival training, anything that any other Marine got.
In the Navy, the number of black enlistees approaches 100,000, and the Navy establishes its first training program for black naval officers.
I didn't know why I was going to be sent there, and didn't actually find out why, because we had sealed orders, until we got there and met 15 other young black men to discover that we were the guinea pigs to either prove or disprove the myth that blacks were not capable of serving as officers in the United States Navy.
They later became known as the Golden 13. The Navy trains the black cadets within a segregated area at Great Lakes Training Station in Illinois.
We tried to study together, work together. Well, certainly we're trying to be better than the next guy, and I think everybody was very competitive. It was very cooperative and yet competitive. By doing that, I think we raised our own level of accomplishment.
Black sailors who were in training came there with a purpose, and that purpose was to make sure that people knew that they could sail, that they were qualified to be sailors. The majority of them, I would say 95% of those guys, would have been able to have sailed any place.
The Navy's USS Mason and the PC-1264, with their predominantly African-American crews, escort and protect vessels during the war years. Pioneering African-American officers and enlisted men also serve in the Coast Guard and Merchant Marine, while protecting our shores and delivering men and material of war to battlefields around the world.
Afro-Americans knew nothing about airborne because it's a very elite service. It was restricted then only to whites. But here we're now going to be the only all-black parachute unit in world history, black from top to bottom.
The 555th Parachute Company, the Triple Nichols. An all-black unit is activated at Fort Benning, Georgia. These paratroopers achieve a remarkable record. Not a single refusal to jump. With unit morale high,